If you are in your late 30s or early 40s, you're pretty much bombarded with messages about declining fertility rates. If you're feeling the pressure to jump into fertility treatments, or perhaps you've already been through several rounds of IVF, then this episode is for you. Today, I'm speaking with a special guest who explains exactly what happens to fertility around the age of 40 and why IVF may not be the best plan after all. Welcome to your journey to fertility. This is the podcast that blends science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so that you can stop stressing that you'll never have your baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Welcome back to Your Journey to Fertility. I'm so excited to have you here with me today because I am speaking with the incredible Monique Cormack on this episode. And we are chatting about a topic that is pretty close to my heart. When I first started IVF at the age of 35, I was already getting comments from my doctors about, not waiting any longer and hurrying up, etc., as I'm sure we have all heard before. Fast forward a few years, and I ended up having my second baby at the age of 39 without any fertility treatments. And this made me think about the reasons that we're pushed into IVF in the first place. Is it actually the best option? And is age a reason to need these treatments on its own? So Monique is a qualified nutritionist with a Bachelor of Health Science, and she's currently completing a Master of Reproductive Medicine. Monique works with individuals and couples to optimize their nutrition for fertility, pregnancy, and beyond. She provides expert advice and with a special interest in using nutrition to support IVF when needed. She is passionate about helping others feel healthier, empowered, and supporting their journeys to fertility, whatever that looks like. Monique's also had a long personal journey with fertility struggles, and she shares about those in this conversation as well. So let's get into it. Here is Monique. Mon, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you on the podcast, and it's so unusual that I'm speaking to someone who lives down the road from me on the podcast. It's filming people all around the world. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. And yeah, likewise, I'm so used to talking to people where we were just saying before, we don't have any common ground when it comes to shops or things, but we have all this random stuff that's just down the road. So yeah, it's great. And thank you.
Next time it'll have to be done in person. So, Mon, I think that most of my listeners and my followers probably know who you are and what you do because the work you do is so amazing and so helpful and valuable. But just in case people are new to you, can you give us a little bit of a background about who you are and what you do?
Sure, of course. Yeah, well, my name's Monique and I am a degree qualified nutritionist. I'm registered with a professional association in Australia, which I think is important to mention just because not all nutritionists are actually degree qualified and registered somewhere. I work exclusively in the sort of fertility, IVF, general preconception care and pregnancy space. And I've been doing so since, I think, about 2020 now. So it was something that I was very strongly drawn to when I was studying due to my own experiences with everything: infertility, IVF, high-risk pregnancy, all of that. So it was sort of natural that I found my way down this path. And now I just run a virtual practice. So I run all my sessions by telehealth. And yeah, I see clients in Australia and actually from all around the world as well. So yeah.
Which is the beauty of the internet these days. We are very lucky that we can do that. You also have quite an interesting personal journey as well to building your family. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how that came about and how you built your family and how that influences your work?
Yeah, of course. So I had a bit of a longer and unexpected journey to building my family. I experienced hypothalamic amenorrhea for a chronic period of time. So we're not just talking, I stopped the pill and didn't get a period for 6 months. We are talking in excess of 5 years. And during this time and coming to terms with the fact that I was experiencing infertility and I was in my early 30s was a very difficult physical and mental journey to overcome. I have tried basically every therapy supplement and powder under the sun, as a lot of infertility people will probably have done the same thing. I eventually went through multiple rounds of ovulation induction and then just a few rounds of IVF in order to start my family, which was amazingly started by, I ended up having identical twins from my IVF journey. They were the only embryo that I got. The rest were not suitable for freezing or transfer, as the lovely phrase is. But I ended up having identical twins. It was a high-risk pregnancy. I gave birth to them prematurely at 31 weeks. And since then, I was actually lucky enough to go on to conceive a singleton pregnancy 3 years later. And that was actually a natural conception. So amazing how much life and the journey can change so unexpected. Like no one has done more pee on a stick tests in one day than me. And sadly that did end in a preterm birth as well, but they're all here with me now and happy and healthy. And, I think after everything I've been through, that's more than amazing, so yeah.
And it goes to show what an impact the work that you do can have on your overall health. It's never ceases to amaze me what women can achieve from these different, not alternative health therapies, but just for looking at things from a different perspective. So thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. So the topic of our podcast today is about trying to conceive as you get older, and particularly in women in their late 30s. And of course, we get to that magical number of 40 where everything is destined to be terribly difficult in the fertility space. It's a very hard place to be in. So how much do you think age really affects fertility, especially if you are over 40?
So we do know that, look, this is a difficult question to answer because the short answer is that age is probably the most powerful factor that affects fertility, particularly if you are somebody with ovaries. Purely based on biology, we have not figured out a way to alter, circumvent, change the process of the fact that we are born with all our eggs already in our ovaries. And so the aging process starts from when we're a fetus, and that is the way things are. That said, I do think there tends to be this narrow-mindedness when we get older and we enter our late 30s and early 40s, where everything gets put down to age. And I think that's the caveat we have to put on. Yes, age is an incredibly important factor when considering fertility. However, we don't want to put our blinkers on and then go, okay, it's all age related. Don't even, and those, like you said, you get to this age and everyone's like, well, don't even bother. It's all age now. It's all downhill from here, blah, 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 blah. And that sort of real pointlessness about then trying to help ourselves or do anything, so.
I think that's a good point to make, isn't it? You can't put everything down to age because everyone knows someone who has fallen pregnant, at a much older age than we would assume would be easy to come by. So is it even worth trying at home if you are over 40 or approaching 40, or is it a matter of you need to just go straight to your fertility doctor?
Yeah, I think this is something that is a really common misconception with fertility doctors and fertility assistants in general. The reality is, when it comes to fertility treatment, which is the reason you go to a fertility doctor, it's not just, I think it might be difficult for me to conceive, I need to see a fertility doctor. What we actually need to do is go back a little step there and go, okay, why do I think or do I know it will be difficult for me to conceive? Now, in the case of advanced maternal age, will seeing a fertility doctor change what you think is your problem or what you know is your perceived obstacle? So you've got to think of, I always encourage patients to think of the obstacle or the hurdle. So if the obstacle is age, right, seeing the fertility doctor, you need to understand what that is likely to improve for you. So if you are 39, trying to conceive, you're ovulating regularly, your sort of timing ovulation, you're able to time intercourse, you're not unaware of any other potential impact on your fertility, you have a partner who's producing sperm, you trying at home and trying to get egg and sperm to meet is still possible. So do you need to go straight to a fertility doctor? What will that achieve? Because actually fertility treatments don't deal with age. So fertility treatments can't reverse the age of your eggs. They can't shoot you back in time to conceive earlier. They can't do any sort of magical treatments to the raw materials of egg and sperm to make them younger. So if you don't have any other factors that might be impacting your chance of conceiving, do you go straight to a fertility doctor? Maybe not. Maybe you give yourself the sort of recommended guideline of around 6 months of like trying to conceive before seeking assistance. And that's actually something a good doctor is likely to ask you initially, is like, how long have you been trying to conceive? Tell me about what you've already done so far, because you need to think about what obstacle is going to be overcome by you actually going to see somebody. Now, for example, to give a completely opposite example, say, your obstacle is that you're missing both your fallopian tubes. Then, you need to see a fertility doctor, because even if you're ovulating, obviously there's no fallopian tube for the egg to go down. So, like, it's so, I think there's this perception that, doing IVF or some fertility treatment will just like fix things. It only fixes certain aspects of fertility. Do you know what I mean? Like helping the egg and sperm to meet each other, but it doesn't deal with things like age. So, yeah.
Thank you for explaining that. I think there's another misconception that people have where you go to a fertility doctor and it's like, well, they're just going to start you on IVF immediately.
Yes, so much.
Also not the case, is it? So perhaps if someone is leaning towards their late 30s, early 40s, if they are considering seeing a fertility doctor and they don't want to go through IVF straight away, or they don't necessarily need that, what are their other options that they can do to help you?
If you're sort of at that advanced end of the age range and you're trying to conceive, I think first of all, what a fertility doctor will do is actually go through and do sort of like a medical history and also a fertility workup. So kind of what I was referring to before, like what obstacles or what hurdles are there that we are trying to overcome here? So you might present and go, look, I possibly need fertility assistance, and you're scared about IVF and you don't want to do it. That really isn't going to happen in the first appointment. Okay, so first of all, they're going to ask you, how long have you been trying to conceive? Like, have you been having unprotected sex? Do you know when you're ovulating? Are you ovulating? What are your menstrual cycles like? Do you have a menstrual cycle? Is it regular? And then they're going to do a whole range of tests. So they're going to do a pelvic ultrasound. They're going to assess like your uterus, your ovaries. What does that look like? They're going to look at your reproductive hormone levels. They're going to check things like your thyroid health and other things that could impact on your fertility, not just your age. Like I said, there's lots of other things. And a good doctor will hopefully also be looking at the partner and going, okay, could one of the reasons that conception has not occurred yet be coming from the sperm producer? So we need to look at that. So there's all this sort of things. And then when it comes to, are there any other options? First of all, are there any things that need to be addressed there? So is there something going on? So some people might have some, not all of these things apply to everyone, but people may have their tubes flushed. So that's one procedure. Some people may have ovulation induction, which is sometimes done by just an oral medication, a short course of medication, because they're not ovulating regularly. So, there can be other factors. It could actually be a male factor thing, and there may be some sort of treatment or concern on that side. So there are other steps to go through and a whole journey to go through. It's not just the term fertility treatment doesn't mean IVF, and actually a lot of people visiting a fertility doctor don't end up doing IVF.
I think that's really important to point out, so thank you. And there's this other term that just gets thrown around as soon as we're over the age of 35. It's always about our egg quality. So it's always about women's egg quality and how it declines and how it rapidly declines. Is this really the case? Do you find that this is the main issue that we're working with as women get older?
That's a really kind of almost a hard question to answer, because another thing that is, just a fact is that we actually can't test for egg quality. And so a lot of cases where we have unexplained infertility, or, so we're not able to really identify factors. Or perhaps in the case of where the person with ovaries is older, we just put it down to age, then often cases will get attributed to egg quality. Now, I can't hand on heart tell you how many of those cases and what percentage that is actually correct, because we have no way of assessing egg quality. But what we do know is that egg quality does decline with age. And that just happens because we are aging. Eggs are cells. Cells age. We age. That's evident from our physical appearance, as well as things that are going on internally. So things don't continue in the same way and to stay at the same quality as they did when we were younger. Now, this decline in egg quality does sort of accelerate once we hit our late 30s. There's more of a suggestion now that it's around the age of 37 rather than 35. So, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is it doesn't seem to affect everyone equally. So you can have a patient that's way younger that seems to have a really difficult time conceiving, no other identifiable factors, and then may end up going through IVF and seem to have a really hard time getting embryos. And it's potentially an equality issue. And then you can have somebody who's 10 years older who is able to conceive, very quickly, either naturally or they do a cycle of IVF and it's done.
Yeah.
And it's like, why does that person have higher quality eggs? I don't know. We won't know. It's so, there are so many factors that could affect our eggs, because think of all the things we've been exposed to our entire life. So, and before we were even born.
That is such a hard one, isn't it? And it's kind of feels overwhelming when you start thinking about them. So when a couple or a woman comes to you and, whether they're going down the assisted route or not, and you do want to address egg quality because they are on the older end of the spectrum. What are the steps that you're going through? What are some of the things that you start to look for? Are you doing additional tests? And what guidelines are you giving them?
Yeah, so I think you're right. All of that said, I think it is important, particularly as we deal with older age, that we do address egg quality. And that's something I definitely always would address. Even if somebody comes to me and says, oh, I'm not able to conceive because I have X condition, like say they have endometriosis. And I'm like, well, we don't just attribute it to the condition. If you're 40, we also need to look at egg quality, which is a factor independent of whatever condition you tell me you have. So some of the things I look for with egg quality, I don't really like the word holistic, because sometimes I feel like that means that people think I'm going to start talking about like their star sign or something like that, which I'm not. Although I am kind of, that's like a slight personal interest, and I love a bit of astrology, but probably not relevant to my consults. So some of the things I would look for would firstly, obviously I would start with the dietary assessment. So some of the things I'd look for improving egg quality is, what can we do to protect our eggs? So we know we can't grow new ones, and we can't really stop them from aging to an extent, but we do know that maybe external factors are playing a role in potentially sort of damaging our eggs and making them lowering their quality. So what can we do to protect them? And when that comes to diet, the first thing I would probably look at is dietary antioxidant intake. So, to put it really basically, we have things that in our body that cause oxidative stress. So free radicals, so they're the little baddies. And what we want to do is we want to consume lots of dietary antioxidants, which are like the goodies. So antioxidants neutralize free radicals. So they reduce the oxidative stress, so the damage that can be done to your eggs. So I look at antioxidant content in your diet. So it's really like unsexy, and I don't have any like super like crazy foods that you need to eat. But like, honestly, are you eating fruit and vegetables? That is where I would start. And I know it sounds so basic, but if you think about, your last couple of weeks of food, and you think about how consistently you actually ate fruit, and how consistently you actually ate vegetables, and how consistently you diversified your diet and had lots of different colors, and, you had more than a small amount. So you had more than just like tomato and spinach on a wrap. You actually had like a salad, or you made a veggie bake at dinner, or you snacked on a piece of fruit. Do you know what I mean? So are you really consistently increasing your dietary antioxidants? That's probably where I'd start. Then I'd start, I guess, looking from a diet perspective, looking at things that may potentially increase oxidative stress. So, the really big ones are like probably quite obvious, but like alcohol, which when you're going through infertility is something that becomes like this best friend, worst enemy kind of thing. Highly processed foods, like ultra processed foods. I'm not talking about like salmon that comes in a can. I'm talking about like, Do you know what I mean? Like
McDonald's.
crisps and yeah, like ultra processed foods. So I think, this whole, I don't want to put pressure on anyone to feel like they have to cook everything from scratch because no one doing that, like we got to live. But to what extent are we reducing our intake of sort of like ultra processed foods, which may not have any real nutritive value and potentially contain higher amounts of added sugars, added salt, things like that, that may increase oxidative stress. So yeah, then we've got like added sugars. So things like sugar sweetened soft drinks are a really obvious one. And there's quite a lot of research around the impact of sugar sweetened beverages on fertility and how that can possibly be a negative factor on egg quality. So looking at what are you putting in that's protecting your eggs, and then what might be coming in that might be damaging the eggs. And then we're trying to like tip the balance, right? And then other things I'd probably look at are external to the diet. So things that, Jen, you can probably speak to this a lot as well, like our sources of stress, our sleep quality. So things that cause oxidative stress include poor sleep, chronic stress, and then also our exposure to toxins. So that might not be things we ingest, but like, plastic packaging on food, plastic water bottles, and sort of exposure to chemicals, which can sort of really vary on the individual. So yeah, quite a spectrum of things to consider.
And I think you mentioned something in there about how there's no magic bullets. There's not a magic potion that you can prescribe to people. It isn't this fun, sexy, exciting thing that people can start doing. It is basic and it takes time, and it's simpler than a lot of us probably realize. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. Are there any other ways in which you then start to address kind of overall health? Exercise? Are we doing particular types of exercise to help with reducing stress? Are we avoiding certain things? Do you go down those guidelines as well?
Yeah, I do. So I think once we start sort of getting past the basics, some of the more advanced sort of, we get the foundations right. And I don't think there's any point in looking at these other things unless you're also doing the basics. But then, yeah, we do start looking at things. So with exercise, I guess body composition as well. Like I'm not a weight focused person. Particularly with my background, I see a lot of people with disordered eating. I also have that lived experience. And so I'm really not a weight, numbers, BMI focused person, but we do know that body composition is something that impacts it. So if I was seeing someone actually who had very low body fat and was, perhaps a little bit invested in their exercise regime, we might actually be looking at exercise and actually scaling that back to improve fertility and menstrual cyclicity and improve egg quality, because at the end of the day, we actually need nutrients, and most of our nutrients come from food, and we actually need to eat, and we need to give our body a chance to absorb those nutrients and enjoy them. And so, yeah, we might be looking at scaling back exercise. Whereas for other people, we know that sometimes body composition, where we tend to have a higher percentage of body fat, can actually increase oxidative stress in the body. So then we might be looking at, okay, where can we fit some exercise in? So how can we do this in a way that's not going to make you feel more shit about your fertility journey and make you feel less shit and actually be helpful? Do you know what I mean? And it's really working with that individual to find that. And then I just wanted to touch on that whole magic bullet. There's no one thing that you can do sort of thing. I know a lot of people listening will probably be like, what about supplements? I'm on 75 different supplements. And like, which everyone is by the time they're like up to some round of IVF. There are certain supplements I would use, and I don't want to sort of like ignore that. I would use, particularly in cases of advanced maternal age, I think there is an argument for using certain supplements where we know, for example, everyone's probably heard of taking coenzyme Q10. The reason we tend to use that with advanced maternal age is because that particular substance in the body, our body's production of that declines as we age. So there is an argument for using higher therapeutic doses with advanced maternal age to compensate, because it may have some protective mechanism on egg quality. So yeah, sure, I would look at that, and that is one of the like next steps I would do. But I would do all the other things as well. So yeah, but yeah, adjusting exercise, helping people figure out their happy place with other lifestyle factors is definitely part of it.
And so important. And that was actually going to be my next question, the supplementation side of things. How important would you say supplements are in comparison to nutrition and what you're eating?
This really can depend on the individual. I actually literally just submitted an assignment for I'm doing the Master of Reproductive Medicine at the moment, and I did a sort of deep dive into 3 nutrients and whether or not we should be recommending people get them from food or from supplements. And the answer pretty much for everyone is it really depends on the individual. I do think with advancing age that the role of supplementation, particularly for some nutrients, there's probably a stronger argument because we do know that our body's natural production of certain nutrients. So, for example, that's the reason I get to skate with coenzyme Q10, it declines. So there's an argument that, okay, if we replace this, and this is the whole reason they look at it for fertility, like if we replace this nutrient, this is a particular antioxidant that may have a beneficial impact on fertility. So there's a stronger argument for using, for example, a higher dose with as we age. Other nutrients, you really have to look at. So, for example, melatonin. So we know that melatonin, probably people think of that as like the sleepy hormone, but melatonin is actually found in like the fluid around our eggs. So is there an argument that we should increase that because it's in the follicular fluid? So, and is that more important as we age, we're sleeping less, or in a shift worker where sleep is dysregulated, or like a really highly stressed person? Should we try and increase that by supplementation because this person is standing out as somebody who may benefit from that for X, Y, and Z reasons? How important is supplements? I think it really depends on the person. I think as a general guide, with advancing age, because of the egg quality and the arguments that sometimes our bodies aren't producing certain nutrients to the same extent, there's probably like a baseline egg quality supplement strategy I would employ. But that said, I think that a lot of people, and probably a lot of people who are going to hear this, are taking a shit ton of things that may not be relevant. And I think the risk is that you just hear so many things are good. Do you know? And it's like, who said it's good? And like, why is it good? If you don't know what the point of it is, like, people are like, oh, I'm taking maca because I heard it will help my fertility. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like the word fertility, like what aspect of your fertility will it help? Do you know? Like, I think there's this thing like where people just start taking, like, I've heard this vitamin's good. And then they finally go to see a professional and they're taking like 10 different things. And I'm like, but these two things do the opposite of each other. Or you start going, oh my God, I can't swallow 4 of those tablets. So I'll just reduce the dose to like a quarter of what I was doing so I can take all these other things. But it's like, well, if you look at the research, you really needed to be just taking the high dose of the one thing. Do you know? So like, because then I see people and they're like, oh, I take a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that. And I'm like, well, I don't know if it works like that. I think you might be better just taking 2 things, but actually taking the dose they did in the studies and not just making up your own little multi-formula, because it just might not be as effective as that dose. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's just how important are they? I think there's like a baseline justification for using it as we deal with advanced, dealing with egg quality. But I also think that there's a tipping point where people just start taking everything and it's like crazy town.
Which was 100% me. And I think
and me.
Yeah, the type A's rule on this one.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help. And it doesn't help your mental health. I mean, I was taking 14, 15 supplements a day at one point. And, God, the expense of that, having to remember. And then you've got to take some with food, some without food, some at this time, some at that time. And, letting it overtake your life in that kind of way is really detrimental as well. So you're right. I think that it is so individual. And that's where working with a professional does actually make all the difference. So thank you. Are there any risk factors that we need to be aware of if we are older and trying to conceive in terms of pregnancy complications? Are there anything that we need to know about? And are there any ways in which we can prevent things?
Look, I think, statistically, we do know, I guess, we start thinking about being pregnant at an older age. And the reality is it does come with some risk factors. We know that there are higher rates of like hypertension, so having high blood pressure, potentially having preeclampsia, potentially getting gestational diabetes, and potentially having like issues with like the placenta, so the way the placenta actually attaches and grows and develops, which is so important. It's like the organ that is going to grow your baby. There are higher risks of having these issues when we have a pregnancy when we're older. There's also a higher risk, I think, when we are pregnant of having a chromosomal abnormality. And I think that is a really scary thing. I personally do work with a lot of older patients. I would say that's actually the majority of people that I work with. And that is always a worry. So you get through everything and you do the pregnancy test, and then you've got to wait for your non-invasive prenatal test, and you've got to wait for the morphology scan, because the reality is that you will be already put in a high risk category, a higher risk for having a chromosomal abnormality. And that's to do with egg quality. So that sometimes the egg doesn't contain the exact genetic material in a way that it's got to combine. And yeah, so, there are those risks. Can we do anything to mitigate those risks? Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to our general health as well. So again, this is one of those things where people tend to put blinkers on and go, oh, you're old, so you're going to have all these problems. And it's like, well, I'm actually not that old, thank you. And also, age is not an obstacle to improving your health on other fronts. So for example, we know that regularly exercising can help with our blood pressure. So optimizing your health, having a good exercise routine can help reduce your blood pressure. If you start your fertility journey, you start your pregnancy with optimal blood pressure, then you lower your risk for developing gestational hypertension or preeclampsia. We know that being at a healthy weight, and I'm referring not, people always jump to the conclusion that it's overweight, but also underweight, can impact on the function of the placenta. So actually optimizing body composition and eating well and getting to a happy state for your body can actually improve placental function, because that's actually a known risk factor. And those things are independent of age. So yeah, there's plenty you can do to reduce those risk factors. I know that when you are a certain age, you will always just get thrown into the high risk group. It's like no shade to you. They've just looked at when you were born and decided that you're high risk of everything. And this is where, it's really important that you talk to your doctor or OB or midwife and go, okay, why have you put me in a high risk? Is it just because of age or because of these other reasons? And what are you doing about it? So, for example, are you putting me on aspirin or whatever it is? And then what can I do about it? Yeah, and they're definitely, it's all about those modifiable risk factors,
Good advice. Thank you. We've spoken so much about women and egg quality, which is, of course, in the lovely patriarchal society that we live in, this is always going to be number one focus. But how important is it to focus on sperm health, especially as men get older?
Yeah, so this is interesting, actually. It's funny because you're right. It's just it's such a crappy thing where as soon as somebody has difficulties conceiving, like they look at the person with the eggs and then they check when they were born and they're like, yes, geriatric, definitely set her hopes too high there. Should have had a baby when she was 23 and she was broke and she was living on her friend's floor in London smoking drugs. That's definitely when she should have had a baby. Sure. But actually, males do experience a decline in sperm quality. It's not as rapid a decline, but after the age of 40, and then particularly after the age of 45, they actually start producing more abnormal sperm. So it does seem to decline as they get older. It is an often dismissed fact, but half the genetic material for your future child is contained in that teeny tiny sperm. So it is also important that they consider their sperm quality. And I'm sure among people you've coached and worked with and people I've worked with, the amount of times that people seek fertility assistance and they're like, don't know what's going on. And then 2 years into it, they're like, oh, yeah. And it's male factor identified, not necessarily related to age, but yeah, age, to answer your question, like males do need, people who are providing sperm need to think about this thing because their quality will decline. The sperm's ability to actually fertilize the egg will decline, and this can contribute to rates of infertility, risk of pregnancy loss, risk of pregnancy complications, because you are part of that makeup, So, yeah, I mean, I wish they would focus on it more. And I really think, like, we need to be doing the semen analysis, like, at the start.
It's simple, it's non-invasive.
Yes, it's easier than everything else. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a topic for another day. But yes, and it is literally 50% of your baby. It's going to impact them regardless. And I just feel that, if a woman is spending time and effort addressing her egg quality, it's very likely she has a partner who is the same age, if not a bit older. And why shouldn't he be addressing his health and his sperm quality at the same time? So would you usually recommend when couples come to see you that the male is doing the same adjustments with his diet and his lifestyle? Is there anything in particular that you like to advise men with in terms of nutrition, supplementation, or exercise?
I do think, and I mean, this is probably me making male generalizations in the opposite way, and I do apologize to, the large proportion of men who are going to listen to this. I guess it's very similar. So when we look at dietary patterns for optimizing fertility, particularly in couples who have attended IVF clinics, there is some research there. A lot of the dietary adjustments are similar, and we're sort of talking about this like modified Mediterranean dietary pattern. That's kind of like the baseline from where I would start for both male and female clients. With male fertility, there are different antioxidants that may be appropriate for improving sperm quality. So for females, there are certain supplements that I would use. For males, there are different ones I would use based on the research. The list is as long as my arm, but for example, there's some research around using carnitine supplements for male fertility. There isn't the equivalent for looking at egg quality. So for example, that might be something. So you might use different supplements. And then if I can make some generalizations about what I tend to see, I do think that alcohol seems to be a bigger issue for male clients that I see. And I think because there's this perception that because they're not actually going to be pregnant, so there's less of that. Females will give up alcohol at the drop of a hat most of the time because they're like, I'm going to do it when I'm pregnant anyway. So there's this real impetus to change. But males don't have that impetus to change. And so they're like, oh, I'll just stop drinking a week before I give the semen sample. And I'm like, please don't do that. Please. And also if you're going from having 20 standard drinks a week, which sounds ridiculous, but do you know, you go out to work drinks, a work function, then work drinks, and then something with your mates on the weekend, you go out 3 times. Would you have 6 standard drinks every time? You might, because a standard drink is not what you think it is. So, don't go from having, 15, 20 drinks a week to then just going cold turkey for like a week or two before, because also you'll find that incredibly hard. It would actually be better for you to drop down a little bit, but maybe still have like 2 drinks. Do you know what I mean? And not feel like this cold turkey approach. So I do feel like alcohol is a bigger obstacle for a lot of the males that I see. And I do think that over exercise sometimes with males can be an issue as well, because some people really get into the gym, and a very small percentage of people that I see actually steroid use, which is something we don't really talk about anymore. But it is still sort of like the attending the gym incredibly frequently population. Steroids are still something that are actually quite commonly used, and there is another myth circulating, I think, among those people that you can just stop them and your fertility will return. And sometimes that does not happen.
Wow. Yeah, it's important to talk about, because that is something that men perhaps don't connect with having a long.
Because it's connected with fitness. Yeah. And they're like, well, I'll just stop and then I'll just go back to it and then I'll just do that. And I'm like, sometimes it doesn't work like that.
Absolutely. And your testosterone levels are one of the biggest drivers of.
Yes. Yeah, we kind of need that. Yeah.
Mon, do you have any success stories, or, to put it in a less cliched way, just any stories of clients that you've worked with who have been over the age of 40 who have had success?
Yes, I would say that probably once we start getting over the age of 45, the majority of client successes that I see tend to use a donated egg. So I think, that reality and that conversation, again, probably on for another day, what do you do differently? Because it's kind of a bit different. Once you sort of, I would say, get over the age of 45, and I have had clients over 45 successfully carry a pregnancy and have a healthy baby, but I would say that's with donor eggs. But then that sort of in-between stage where everyone's like, oh, it's my eggs, I'm not going to try again. Plenty of, success stories where, we either see sometimes stopping IVF and getting pregnant, because I think one of the things we were talking about at the start is that some people go into fertility treatment because it's an age-related thing. But if there's not any other reason for doing the cycle, then it is possible to between cycles actually conceive through working on egg quality and through sometimes just taking a step back and going, okay, I'll give myself 3 months to just sort my shit out before I go back and actually conceiving. Because if you're ovulating an egg and there is sperm available, it's possible to become pregnant. And I feel like those success stories are more common than people drastically changing their IVF results. Do you know what I mean? Because, I've actually had a couple of good successes lately with people who've been told that their egg quality is really poor and it changing. Like, we are talking from getting no usable embryos to being able to actually freeze some. And that's both on the female side and the male side. So actually something that I see happen quite a lot, if I can encourage males to possibly think about their contribution more, is I've had a lot of clients who've been told that they need to use ICSI or ICSI. So that's when there's a potential sperm issue identified. I've had a lot of people end up getting a natural fertilization IVF cycle and not needing ICSI anymore. So, you know, I think there is so much that you can do. And yeah, going back to the start, like looking at those things that you can modify and working on them, and not just putting up age as this wall and going, oh, that's the reason for everything. Because
absolutely. Yes, because it isn't. Is there any advice that you would give to those who are trying to conceive over the age of 40, whether they're just starting or whether they have been on this journey for a while and their age is kind of really creeping up on them?
I think taking some time to not feeling that, don't respond to initial pressure, like just don't have just like a hot reaction. Think about what's going on. So what are you worried about? What have you had tested so far? What are your other obstacles? What factors are within your control that you want to do something about, that you're motivated? So is it lifestyle? Is it food? Is it, what do you want to focus on? Think about those things first. And then in terms of like seeking fertility treatment and going ahead with fertility treatment, it really, I guess it comes down to how long have you been trying? What do you want? And like family planning. So something I wanted to mention before is like, you know, should you go straight to IVF if you're older? One of the arguments for doing IVF would be that potentially if you are able to get more than one embryo out of a cycle, you can kind of jump ahead. You know, you can go faster than nature in that you're able to freeze multiple embryos. But is that actually important to you? And if you've already done a couple of rounds of IVF and that's not what happens, like if you're only getting one viable embryo or not even that every time, is it time to sort of go, okay, what advantage is going through multiple rounds of fertility treatment giving me? Do you know what I mean? So actually, I think just taking some time to take stock, knowing that you aren't just a number, and that there are things that are still worth focusing on. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. I think that's so incredibly helpful to remember this. Taking away the pressure of time is the hardest thing to do, but sometimes it can be the best thing you can give yourself. Mon, thank you so much for everything that you have shared today. I feel like I could ask you 1,001 questions about so many different topics. So we will have to make a time for, conversation number 2 at some point.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being here. If people would like to learn more about you, the work that you do, and reach out for individual support, what is the best way to do that?
So you can either just contact me. I'm generally always on Instagram. Sometimes my messages build up and I'm a bit slow, but I'm trying. So you can find me over on Instagram. It's just Monique Cormack Nutrition. It's just all one word. Or you can visit my website, moniquecormack.com, and send me an email, which hardly anyone does these days. But yeah, you can email me. And those are probably the easiest ways to get in touch with me.
Amazing. And I will add a link to all of those in the show notes. So thank you so much again for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Jen.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode today. I love how beautifully Monique explains everything, and I hope that you got a lot out of that conversation. Now, on the next episode, we are going full woo. I'm going to be speaking to Nancy Weiss, who is a psychic medium and a spirit baby communicator. I love talking about this stuff. It is so interesting. And this is the episode that you want to listen to if you feel that you are so close to bringing your baby home, but you just need that little bit of extra reassurance that they're on their way. I can't wait for this. So until then, sending you all my love as you continue your own journey to fertility. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.